Oh, you just testing.
Boom, 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 boom. Good evening, everybody. I will ask the rowdy councillors and council executive to find a place of repose, and we'll be ready to press on. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's an important part of our process, and we thank you for taking the time this evening to contribute to our draft 23-24 budget community consultation session. Before I continue, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this great land on which we meet, and also to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. I would also acknowledge that with us tonight are a number of my fellow councillors, including Deputy Mayor Jeff McConnell, councillors Marshall Chalk, Michael Enright, Virginia West, and of course the newest member of our team, Amanda Hay. And Duncan McGuinness is a late apology for family circumstance. I also recognise the work that the council team have done, and for those who haven't met before, introduce just to my left the CEO, David Keenan, and I'll allow him to introduce the rest of the members of the executive team who are also here tonight. This event is certainly a first in many, many ways. It's the first time we've gone out to the community to seek your feedback on our financial planning for the coming year, and tonight's session is also the last in a trilogy of meetings which are the first of their kind across the region, to go beyond having a Let's Talk Scenic Rim or a digital or written response, but to also have the opportunity for these presentations. I can assure you that on behalf of myself and my fellow councillors, we're very pleased to present the budget for your consideration and to have these sessions available. It certainly reflects our determination to continue to build a strong future for the Scenic Rim and to provide best value to ratepayers through the responsible allocation of very limited financial resources. This draft budget has been framed in the context of fiscal responsibility based on robust planning and analysis to ensure sustainability, a strategic approach to service delivery to meet community needs, and above all, good governance. It has been framed in the context of increasing cost pressures reflecting the current economic climate we are all aware of, as well as ongoing recovery from the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and an unforgettable series of extreme weather events which also in recent time affected our region. So as well as the draft budget itself, this consultation includes our capital works program and our schedule of fees. As I mentioned earlier, members of the executive team are here this evening to discuss with you those particular aspects of our financial planning. Council is committed to minimising the financial burden on ratepayers and has continued to focus on cost recovery in setting its fees and charges for the year. We understand the cost of living pressures facing members of our community and have aimed to keep our revenue needs to a minimum. However, balancing the aspirations of the community captured in the shared vision of the Scenic Rim Community Plan 2011 to 2026 against the pressures of maintaining public assets and protecting our future financial sustainability are all key factors in determining our budget settings. The draft 23-24 budget is aligned with the draft operational plan, which is underpinned by the corporate plan, Scenic Rim 2026, and the broader Scenic Rim community plan previously referenced, the 2011 to 2026 version. During consultation in developing our community plan, one of the key priorities identified by residents was the efficient and equitable delivery of affordable services that provide best value for money. That guiding principle has underpinned the development of this budget. As I indicated earlier, as well as tonight's session, we have held similar events in the same time slot last week and again last night in Boona and then Beaudesert, and tonight is the last of that series. You can, of course, continue to contribute to the community consultation through the Let's Talk Scenic Rim online platform, which will be accepting feedback on this project until Wednesday the 3rd of May. Once all feedback has been considered, the final 2023-2024 annual budget will be prepared and then tabled for adoption at a special meeting of Council scheduled for Wednesday the 14th of June. Council values all your feedback and is committed to continuing to work with the community to deliver a sustainable future for our region. I thank you for your time in attending tonight's session and for your anticipated constructive feedback that will help to achieve our shared goal of shaping a successful future for our spectacular Scenic Rim. One more note before I sit down and listen and observe. I will be back later to wrap up. One of the learnings we've had is that some people do have a lot of questions. I'm just going to ask tonight, if you do have a lot of questions, when you start to speak, flag that you have them, but please present them one at a time so that people have a chance to remember the first question and respond to it, rather than by the time they get to the end of the sixth, they can't remember what the first was. That will help the process run more smoothly, please. With that, I'll hand over to CEO David.
Good evening, everyone. Whoops. I'll just lean down a bit. Good evening. My name's David Keenan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer. This is not the first time I've gone through a public consultation on a budget. I've done that at Mount Isa and certainly at Southern Downs, and I worked in Victoria where it's required in Victoria as well. A couple of quick things I need to do. I need to acknowledge two general managers here, Oliver and Chris, and two general managers at the back, Deborah and Caroline. So we have 4 staff here. Thank you for them being here. We are in an environment where it is becoming more and more challenging to make sure that we have balanced budgets. We're in a period of time where there's a bit of a hiatus in relation to funding. At the moment, there is not a great deal of funding coming out from the state government as it leads up into October next year, where there is obviously an election going through there as well. We are also in a position where we're waiting to see what are the programs that will actually be developed and delivered through the Albanese government. At the moment, there aren't a lot of funding opportunities that are available. We are waiting for a number of guidelines to come out, and from there we can reassess. We need to be ready to be able to do shovel-ready projects or have design in place as well. A couple of other quick things. It's important that the input is constructive. You will get a comprehension tonight of exactly how much money we do have and how much money we do not have. So it's a matter of trying to balance those things. We really don't want to go down the path of delivering a deficit budget. We've done 3 deficit budgets. We don't want to do any more deficit budgets in the future. So it's really important that we get your feedback. Really important that everyone understands the constraints that exist within the current budget and future budgets as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask Oliver to come forward and do a bit of a presentation. Following Oliver will be Chris, who will highlight some of the capital works programs that are proposed next year. Please come forward.
Thank you, David. Before we get started, I guess just another matter of housekeeping. those that aren't familiar with this venue, there are a set of toilets at the back through that door. So if you're requiring to use access public toilets, they're just at the back of this building, through the back there. My name's Oliver. I'm the General Manager, Council Sustainability. Really pretty chuffed tonight to see the number of people that have turned up with showing some interest. It's really good. I haven't got the full numbers, but certainly outdone the other two sessions that we've had in regards to here. As the CEO's indicated, I will be providing a brief overview of the document. It's good to see also I can see a number of people having copies of this document. The document's available online through the Let's Talk Scenic Rim. I think there's also a copy or two that might be available at the back, but I'm certainly not going to go through it verbatim. It's quite voluminous in its nature, but certainly just wanted to highlight some of the key highlights or key points that I think that are worthy of highlighting, especially around some of the challenges of putting this budget together. And then we really want to maximise the purpose of tonight is to seek the feedback and some of the queries from the participants. So without further ado, I'll get about it. So I'll just provide a really brief intro why the council has a budget. Council sets about and develops an annual budget because it's responsible for providing a wide range of services, facilities and assets to the Scenic Rim community. These services and facilities include, but aren't limited to, roads, bridges, waste management, parks, recreation, libraries, community centres and even disaster management. Additionally, the budget provides an opportunity for the council to communicate its priorities and plans to the community. And part of that communication is the purpose for tonight. And that's to seek feedback and input from residents and stakeholders. And this ensures that the council's spending aligns with the needs and expectations of the community. Some highlights, I guess the budget's not just an annual one-year budget. As what's contained in the documentation, you'll see what we call a long-term financial forecast, which includes 10 years of forecasting. That tries to ensure that decisions made now aren't just for this year, and certainly not just for that particular term in council, but also take into mind the future generations and the future years that these decisions may impact. Now, one of the key points that I needed to point out was when it comes to funding, this graph here indicates that council is fortunate that we're the master of our destiny when it comes to funding. 69 or just under 70% of our funding comes from general rates and utility charges. Yeah, we've seen some councils that do face certainly some sustainability issues, and the CEO pointed out before, their mixture is they're reliant on 70% of external funding, and as we've seen now, that funding pools from both the Queensland government and the Australian government, there's uncertainty around that, and it's certainly hard to try and budget for 70% of that funding to come in. So we're fortunate that 70% of our funding is self-source. But despite that, I guess I point out that unlike other of our neighbouring councils that we're grouped with in the South East Queensland, the likes of Brisbane, Gold Coast, Logan, whilst we do have 70% coming from our ratepayers, they're fortunate that they have 70% in their mixture coming from commercial. Now, 70% of our rates revenue is still residential. So, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to try and elevate the other aspects or the other categories to start offering that level of subsidy to the residents. We'll note that, you know, the likes of Brisbane, the Gold Coast, Logan, yeah, the council is able to offset some of their expenditure through the high volumes of commercial rate base. We're not in that space yet. 70% of our rate base is still residential. So at the end of the day, we're providing these services, and the people that are required to provide the funding for that is and are the residents. I will touch on one of the most recent things is you would have seen valuations have just been recently undertaken, and we've seen some extraordinary recognition of some fluctuations again through the Scenic Rim. We've seen some localities have as high as 90% rate valuation. I just want to sort of demystify that there's a straight correlation between your valuation and what the rate increase is. I'll use a simple analogy that, council has a $1 million budget and it has $1 million in rates valuations. Now, if that rate valuation suddenly doubled to $2 million, the council budget is still $1 million. So we would adjust the rate in a dollar to 50 cents to generate the $1 million in revenue. So just because, there's across the board at the moment, we've seen a 26% increase in valuations. So the 18,493 properties in the Scenic Rim, we've seen the valuation increase from 6.48 billion to 8.33. But more importantly, what I've said before, that's a 26% increase. So you're not going to see a 26% rate increase. We have to factor in all the factors like the CPI, rising cost in electricity costs, insurance premiums, and everything else. And then that's how we get to a position in terms of how we balance a budget. At this current time, take into account the level of services that we're providing, the assets that we have to maintain, and all the factors that we need to take into account, we've come to a position that we're seeking consideration from council that in order to balance the budget, and by what I mean by balance is what's included in this graph is there's a slight, by having a consideration for a 7.9% rate increase, council it's meeting its statutory and legislative obligations, as the CEO has provided before. We're not adopting a deficit budget. We're actually adopting a budget that's balanced, albeit a little surplus of $33,000. So effectively, it's a balanced budget. Now, if council was considering a 6.9% rate increase, that would be a deficit budget. And as the CEO pointed out before, we need to try and avoid adopting deficit budgets. The Department of Local Government, Queensland Treasury Corporation, monitor council's finances and performance, and monitors our budgets and our actual performances to ensure that prudent decisions are made. And one of those prudent decisions is around setting what the rate increases should be. Now, if council was to adopt an 8.9% rate increase, we'd see a modest operating surplus. But what we're providing for consideration at this point in time is a 7.9, which results in a $33,000 operating surplus, or basically a balanced budget. They're the key points that I sort of noted, and I did touch on about the department and to give some updates around asset management and the capital works delivery. Thank you.
Good evening to you all, and thank you, Oliver. Before I actually go into some of the detail of capital works program, I need to outline that the current written book value of replacement for the assets that council maintain is close to $1.1 billion. Within that, we certainly would understand that there's certainly an aspect of the fact of the pricing increases that we've had more recently that would actually see that replacement value may be somewhat higher than that if we were to do a full review at this time. Also, we also have 4 asset management plans that cover off on the majority of these assets. That reconstruction work, we actually build back better so that we're not seeing repeat issues when it comes to future events. That $2 million will go towards our portion of any proposed improvements that fund with us or with our support, and also for isolated locations where we fund them entirely. Also within the budget, we have $3.6 million allocated to reseals. I've done some high-level working at each of these events, and roughly about 25% of that budget will be spent within the eastern region. Within the budget, there's details of $500,000 proposed to be spent at Wallen Road for an extension of a footpath. Also, there's varying levels of investment within community facilities. This investment across this asset class is around maintaining and the level of service that those particular pieces of infrastructure provide to the community. It's also worth noting that we currently have gone through a review process of not only community facilities but camping facilities as well as sporting facilities, and this review has yet to be fully endorsed by council, but this will certainly inform the best way to invest in these asset classes into the future. Also contained within the budget, there is, from an operating sense, there's some additional operational budget allocated to the Vibrant Active Towns and Villages to actually add to the long-term commitment that council made a number of years ago to progress to future stages of the consideration of Canungra as for activation through that program. Also within that program, there's an allocation of $250,000 to go towards the detailed design of Gallery Walk. Before I say any more, before I close and we go to questions, I must say that, and I've mentioned this as a result of questions I've had at other gatherings such as this, around, I've been in the industry of construction for almost 30 years, and the last 18 months or so have been probably the most trying times when it comes to getting resources, and not only getting those resources, but the cost of actually the materials and to actually service or continue to deliver what we deliver. So if someone would have told me 4 years ago that you needed to order particular culvert sizing 18 months in advance to actually achieve their delivery, I probably wouldn't have believed them, but that's the situation we're faced with at the moment. And it was there was a question asked last night about why have we allocated a reasonable amount of money within our design portion of our budget. That's around getting our projects in a position where we know the material that we need so we can order in advance and actually be much better positioned to actually deliver these projects in a more timely manner. With that, I will hand over back to Oliver to start the questions.
Thanks, Chris. Prior to this question, I just missed some key points, but obviously some of the highlights of the key aspects of the budget. So this budget that it's at this current time, it's $110 million, what they call the headline budget, $110 million. So that includes what it costs to operate and the capital. The capital budget component's about $32 million, and then that's consolidated as part of the operating costs. You take away the depreciation, and that's what's called your headline budget. So it's a $110 million budget. And then one of the other key flyers in here is obviously we provide that some of the aspects of the operating functions, but another key highlight point is for every $100 in rates, where does that $100 go to? So you can see from here, nearly for every $100, nearly $50 goes in towards the roads infrastructure planning. So, and then some of the other aspects in there. I'll take the opportunity now before we do questions. Is part of this process now is to seek feedback and queries from the attendees tonight, but also as part of the engagement process is to formalise the feedback if it's related to a budget that's seeking further consideration, is to capture these as part of our the forms on the table and also through Let's Talk Scenic Rim, so that the feedback is then tabled at the ordinary meeting on the 9th of May at the council meeting, so that then council will then take that feedback on board, and then through the next series of workshops with the budgets, whether or not those impact the budgets or whatnot. So there's an opportunity for this feedback to be formally recognised by council, so that if for consideration and to then program into the discussions at the workshops. We will have some roving mics around, so we will now take the series of questions. And as the Mayor indicated, if you have multiple questions, if we can ask them one at a time so that we can capture those and provide the necessary response accordingly for each and every question that's asked tonight.
May I start? I think
So the one thing that we didn't mention is part of the process tonight is we may have a number of people that aren't able to attend on the night. So this presentation is being live streamed. So we do require a microphone so that the people listening in the virtual world can hear. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lawrence Manitsky. I only have one question in relation to operating expenses. Where does an expenditure contingency in the event of a loss in the Oaklands versus Scenic Rim Regional Council appear?
I won't answer that into depth because obviously that's a legal case that's still going. However, under normal circumstances, it is covered off. Council is we have informed our insurers, so it's an ongoing process. We'll guarantee that it doesn't impact the operating aspects of council. The fact that we do have our insurers involved in the matter, if anything, that it's a contingent liability, and that's not currently on the balance sheet. So,
thank you.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations, Council, for doing this first budget consultation meeting. I have 4 questions. We hear a lot about the community plan and how it is used to justify projects. The community plan outlines the community's expectations in normal times. These are not normal times with the cost of living pressures. The Courier Mail had a headline on the 21st of February, "Costs push families to the brink." Families cannot increase their income so they have to find cuts to their budget. This is especially so for our elderly community who are asset rich and cash poor. The federal and state governments are looking at ways to reduce the pressure on families. Why cannot Council adopt a similar policy of a cost-cutting rather than a policy of revenue raising for this budget and reduce the increase in rates to a reasonable level?
thanks for your question, Mr. Wasteful. I guess there's key elements to that query. I guess what I pointed out before. There is a level of expectation around the services, and this budget is just maintaining those current levels of service. That includes providing libraries, providing pool facilities, maintaining the roads at certain levels of expectation. Even the capital budget, you'll notice that compared to other years, it's quite small, because we do know that there is still a volume of capital works that's currently in the 22-23 budget that's yet to be complete. So, I'll start on that, and I'll probably be looking at the CEO to add some additional comments. Yep, should be good.
Thank you for question number 1, Nigel. You've raised a really good point there, and the issue we've got is the cost of living across the board for our employees as well. So it extends into the employees and the community at the same time. As we go through this process, we will look at where there are any opportunities to bring down that cost of living, but it is challenging at this point in time. If I remember correctly, inflation either got announced yesterday or the day before. I think they celebrated it went down by 0.8% it went down by, and I think it's sitting around the 7% mark, if I remember correctly. As we go through this process, if there are any initiatives you have that can relieve the cost of living, please make them as part of the submission that you may put in.
Thank you. I'm sure some of the members here will be quite happy to have some cuts in your expenditure to reduce the rate pressures, but they can talk to that one. Question 2. On page 5 of your consultation document, you outline operational expenses in broad terms. External contract management, 6.6 million, regional prosperity, 1.7 million, community development, 1.6, cultural services, 1.5, customer contact, 1.4. But how are these sums being spent? Why will Council not publish the operational budget in full?
I guess this budget has been priced in terms of the service delivery and the expectations of the community. The way that the budget's been provided is, in providing that service, that's the cost. in,
Sorry, in my experience, they're rolled up for a whole lot of different reasons. Part of that is actually protecting the wages of some of the people who are actually employed at the council. Some of the expenses are presented as part of this process, but to put the whole ledger up is not something that I'd be recommending to council, and I haven't recommended that to council.
Thank you. That doesn't actually answer the question. But other people will have their views. It is good that the Capital Works budget is now published. This eventually occurred after a question from Amanda Hay at a public meeting on Tamborine Mountain. And may I congratulate Amanda on her recent election to the position of Councillor for Division 1. The Capital Works budget proposes $500,000 on a footpath along Wonga Wallen Road. When I was a councillor for Division 1, 2012 to 2020, I had a saying, is this project essential or desirable? I question whether this project is either. In 2013, I conducted a survey of the residents of this road, and I asked them the question, would you want a footpath? The majority of those who responded said no. Is this footpath wanted or required?
I guess part of tonight is actually getting that sort of feedback as well. I did have a similar a question of existing. Certainly happy to take feedback on the fact if Wonga Wallen Road's footpath is not considered a high priority for that area, but it's certainly what's been considered is a link from Gallery Walk through to the Heritage Centre. And that was certainly one that was put forward, and we've certainly had inquiries about that, and we've looked at what foot traffic there may be once it actually is in place. But happy to take that feedback.
Well, maybe residents of Wonga Wallen Road can provide that to council. Last question.
just on that one, I think just when you mentioned that the Capital Works program is the first time it's published, I think we've always published the Capital Works programs, just that the future years ones have been dotted out in terms of setting the expectations. And some of the points you've raised now is while some of those projects have been earmarked out now between this year 1 and year 10, there's bound for those to be changed. So I guess the reason for the dots in those future years was always to say that there could be some uncertainty and some changes in that suit, which is similar to what is now.
Absolutely. When it was first published, we did have those dots for that reason.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But at least we are publishing it, which is good. It's good if we saw the operational budget as well. Last question. In the Capital Works program, you have a cemetery plan for Tamborine Mountain in the years beyond. Do you have a location for that?
Good question. That's why we're putting in money for a plan. The reality of it is, with a lot of our cemeteries, we do have to have a long-term vision on how we're going to manage the provision of that service. And certainly the idea of having an allocation in future years is to actually certainly undertake that study and actually understand the future need and certainly look at what appropriate locations into the future. So the whole idea of having money is to actually be able to plan for the future.
Absolutely. So you don't actually have a location plan?
No, not at this point in time, and the money is certainly there to actually undertake that study.
Based on current usage, when will our cemetery run out?
I'm not going to try and attempt to answer that question, but certainly there would be officers back in the organisation that have done the modelling and certainly looked at, and I know I won't mention which particular cemeteries we are more concerned about. Tamborine Mountain isn't probably one of them, but at this time, but certainly best to have the plan in place because no parcels of land are at a premium with regard to that sort of facility, especially located here on the mountain.
Thank you, Chris.
My name is Roland Lindenmeyer and I have two questions. First question, in the Capital Works program, you've got swimming pools. First of all, a question to you, Aqua Fitness Pool, what and where is that?
Yes, the Aqua Fitness Pool is actually a facility that is in Boona, and it's actually a facility that the community built approximately 10 or so years ago. As with a lot of this infrastructure, there is always a need to have ongoing replacement program. There are certainly some aspects of that pool that needs replacement, and that's given its value, it becomes a capital project.
Yes, I just wanted to know
hydrotherapy
where
pool,
it
yeah.
was, that's all.
Yeah, sorry. Yep.
Now, the continuation of my first question is there anything in the budget to replace, improve, or in any other way enhance the old-fashioned, overutilised pool here on Tamborine Mountain?
Not at this point in time. Realistically, the actual cost to replace a pool to current standards is quite considerable. Look, I've seen a lot of councils actually go down the path of rehabilitating existing structures because of the cost to provide a pool. That reduces the cost by 40%, but I certainly understand that the facility that is currently provided is one that with limited lanes and to a 25-metre standard. I think we look down the road at Gold Coast that actually have about a similar number of pools, but they certainly service approximately 60 to 70,000 people on average as a population, whereas our entire population of the region isn't that, and we are servicing not to the same standard, but the same number of pools, which certainly is certainly a trying exercise when you're trying to provide that service across a limited number of people to support it.
I understand that, but Tamborine Mountain has in excess of 8,000 people, many of them elderly, who would utilise a pool if it was more user-friendly, and we have more people here than in the actual town of Beaudesert. So I believe it should be upgraded.
So I'd suggest you put that in some form of feedback to us. And going back to what I said, if we can make the facility that is currently there more user-friendly, that would certainly be a good start. As far as a full replacement and a rebuild, that is quite a considerable cost, and we'd be certainly looking to other levels of government for funding for that to occur, but certainly welcome the feedback.
Okay, thanks. Question number 2.
Sorry, yes, in terms of putting the feedback, we do have the team that's going to be available after the forum for you to, they've got a number of iPads there, so that they will able to lodge those. Otherwise, there's also the manual form, but the recommendation is the team will assist you in submitting that formally, so at the back once.
Thank you. Question number 2. The talk is of improving, I don't know exactly how, Gallery Walk, and is there any consideration for the bypass road in Cook Road? Because it's going to be very, very congested for locals using Gallery Walk.
Yes, certainly there is that corridor that's been preserved for a future road. Given that it's combined with or Gallery Walk is a Department of Transport or a state road, there are some complications in getting that project moved forward. I certainly, there's probably 2 parts to your question as well. The first part is understanding that the parking situation that's currently presented and the configuration isn't conducive to potentially good traffic flow either. That's where council has purchased a portion of land, and you certainly would have actually understood or seen the plans for off-street car parking there, which was certainly to look at improving the through flow of traffic as part of that project.
Hi, how are you? Do I have to stand up or can I stay here? You can hear me, right? Good. All right, I might have 2, possibly 3 questions. The first one was you said something about a review of sports, but it was very vague. Could you just explain that in a little bit more detail?
So we've undertaken a review of the sporting infrastructure which council provides or is on land that council provides. Most of the infrastructure under numerous years of agreements and leasing arrangements have actually been through the leasing agreements, been the responsibility of the sporting groups to maintain and or build. we certainly saw that there was a need to understand how much of the infrastructure was there and the quality of that infrastructure and what was needed to actually get it back to a standard. Second part to that is that will now inform, we're just out to tender, I think they're assessing the tenders now for a sport and recreational plan, which will not only involve the infrastructure that council currently provides, the infrastructure that's provided on land that council controls, but also look at other opportunities from a sporting point of view moving forward. So that body of work will start soon, and there will certainly be an opportunity for community input into that moving forward. Yes.
Sorry, just to make it really clear, there are 2 studies and then there's one more additional resource. The first study is the one being done by Ross Planning, which is due to go to council in about the next week, 2 weeks. That one will go through and look at the existing infrastructure that's here and make recommendations about what should be prioritised in relation to the issues at each of those facilities. The second investigation or study will be a broader one, looking at participation rates, looking at the sports that are here, the sports that are not here, and how to actually do that, what are the facilities that are required in the future, and that will also tie into what is the Olympic needs in the future as well. The third component that comes into it, in the draft budget at the moment, there is funding for an officer to go, a staff member, to go and work with all the different sporting clubs to help them with grants, to help them with all aspects of managing sports facilities, committees, etc. So they're the 3 key components that come out of that.
With the existing pool that we have now on the mountain, I guess I'm not understanding if it's a council-run pool or if it's a Rackley's pool. So I'll leave that as one question.
It's a council pool that's contracted out to...
City View Management.
Yeah, I can't remember their names. So that's contracted out, which is not uncommon for... Which one? Ratley. Yeah. So it's not uncommon for local governments to do that. Sometimes they put them out for a long period of time. Sometimes, depending on the managers you get of the pool facility, it goes back under council ownership, council operation. There's pros and cons for both of those.
How do we extend the pool that's there now, since it is there and we do use it 6 months out of the year, and possibly June, July, and August would be too cold? Why can't we expand a month later and open a month earlier, only leaving it closed for June, July, and August?
Certainly we've done trials in the past.
Not really. When?
Yeah, and...
I've worked there a lot. When have we actually done trials that were really appropriate?
I think during, and I may be corrected because I could be wrong, was when the Commonwealth Games were on. We actually looked at, given that there could have been a heightened interest in swimming and other aspects of sport, we actually kept the facility open. It was planned to be for 4 weeks. After the first week, numbers dropped quite considerably. The second week, hardly anybody turned up, so the trial ended because council was actually funding that, because part of the agreement with the contractors was that to extend that, we'd actually paid additional fees to make that happen. So certainly there will be an officer's report going to council around extended hours, but I was each year coming into the school holidays at Easter, I think the weather's really warm. I've got a pool at home myself, but first week into the school holidays, I'm not hopping in that pool. It's already got too cold for that sort of activity.
We have a beautiful new heater that you bought.
Yes, I know.
We didn't buy it for summer, did we?
Yeah, sorry?
We didn't buy it for summertime weather.
No.
We bought it for the colder times.
Yes.
But in honesty, when that trial happened, that was 2 weeks. It wasn't publicized. There was no advertising. It really was an unfair sort of criteria to say, whoop, sorry, we're not doing it because no one came. It just wasn't enough.
Look, again, I'd love the feedback. And we're certainly aware and certainly have had that feedback already, and a report will be provided to council.
Yeah, that pool has only grown in numbers, and every year it grows more. And it's so much as far as the active and healthy community and the elderly and the young and the injured. So is this something that goes through council, or is this Rackley's? That's what I want to know.
It goes through council as a consideration of an increased level of service to be provided by council.
But there's no budget. It doesn't say the actual operating expenses for the pool. Is it really going to, like, I don't know how much it is for the budget for the pool.
Okay. Back to probably Oliver's question, a lot of that has been rolled up within
Yep.
the facility side aspect of that. So, look, happy to take the feedback, happy to report further on looking at expanded hours.
Yeah, what you pointed out there before, 0, that's capital. So there's no capital works, but the operating's, the cost,
Okay.
the contract costs and electricity and consumables, that's still contained in the operating budgets.
Okay.
That are all rolled up.
I sort of feel, personally, my name's Narelle Bonsall, and I feel that a pool should be a service, not a business. That's where I have a trouble with the council, so that when Rackley's is leasing it, they're intending to get a profit. So when, I don't know who Scott Osman is, but when he says significant funding is required to maintain swimming pool operations, I want to know how much that is for an extra month or 2 months or 3 months. The operational costs far outweigh income received. The income received part is a problem I've got trouble with. If you're going to, look, I love the library, but I walk by the library and sometimes there's 3 staff members and not a person in there, and it doesn't close, and it's a service to the community, and I've paid rates here 33 years and I'm part of that 70%. So my money, or our money, I won't, but you know, do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, no, I
Yeah.
understand completely. And every community goes through the same thing. And it's about prioritising what the services they want are and when and how they are delivered. Swimming pools, and I'm glad you mentioned libraries, are not profit-generating facilities. They are there for the community good.
Then why
So-
does Rackley's lease it if they're not going to make money?
So, no, they do make money. They cover their costs and they make money. And what we will need to do, I'm unaware of how long their contract goes for, but as you come to the end of each contract on these, and they're not usually more than about 5 years, it's up this year,
Yeah.
then we will go through a review process. More than happy to do that. I'd like to keep the library open if that's okay.
Me
Yep.
too. And the pool, please.
Yep. So
Yeah.
we've just got to look at how we make those options. Oliver spoke before about the 70-30 breakdown on rates. It is good we're in charge of our own destiny, but it is a good idea if we lessen our reliance on rates. So if we can do that, that helps the budget overall. But what we'll do is, if you can put in a submission with your details, more than happy to come and have a chat, more than happy to have a look at where their contract is up to as well, and go from there. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Tanya Lidner. I have 4 questions. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion here tonight about how much money you don't have for the services up here, so that's pretty clear. So I'm wanting to ask if you can, first of all, I would like to paint a picture. I have a young daughter on the mountain, currently at the high school, Tamborine Mountain State High School. Extremely well-run high school, as is the college and all the other schools. She did attend this school here also. We currently have an extreme increase issue with vaping, ice, meth on the mountain, as opposed to the rest of the Scenic Rim. There's a lot of money that does come in to try and address mental health issues, etc. Originally, vaping was brought about, is now owned by a nicotine company, Philips. It was originally designed to try and decrease those that were smoking cigarettes. The problem is, which I'm sure you've probably read, it's a federal worldwide issue. We now have a very big black market available on the mountain. There are children that are siphoning it out to young children and making basically money under the table. The problem we have is that when these children, because the schools have to run a tight ship, so what happens then is when somebody is caught, they're suspended or expelled from school, they go through whatever processes that are in place. That can then affect the person if they are living on the mountain, if they then can't attend any of the schools due to their policies. They're then potentially having to either sell their house, or if they're renting, they're having to move out. So there's a lot of mental health issues here, okay? So I just wanted to paint this picture because this is happening in the mountain, all right? Maybe a lot of you aren't aware of this, but it is. My goal for this mountain is to make this mountain the very healthiest it can be. It once upon a time was recognised as a sanctuary, and I do find that it is slowly being destroyed. So my question to you is, under parks and landscapes, under your bollards, There's currently a footpath that's been extended from the Tamborine Mountain coffee plantation that currently finishes up near Whites Road, the bit of a little path to nowhere. However, if you were to continue along that path in a reasonably safe manner, there's a bit of a grassy area to each side, you can very safely come in at Normandy Court at the back of the showgrounds, which I believe this has been presented some years ago, where they were wanting a road and footpath, etc. Obviously, we don't have that type of budget, but what I would like to ask is, can we potentially put up some bollards at the end of where it starts at Normandy Court, respecting those that do live there, because obviously they don't want cars going through, so they currently have gates there, but where people can walk through, run through, ride a push bike through, come out at the end of Long and Esme, and you're basically connecting the community from one side of the mountain to the other. There's really no expense, and if you say you haven't got the budget for bollards, then please let me know who your supplier is and I will arrange for donations if that's the case. So really there's no, that's not a hard question.
Yeah, no, again, I think put that in as a submission and we'll certainly take that into account. That link is actually on our forward list of works. Council has also allocated a budget this financial year to look at alternative treatments. Not all footpaths or paths need to be concrete. So that's certainly identifying or looking at ways in which achieving links that may not necessarily be to that concrete standard. The engineer in me says that there is a standard that you need to follow, but realistically, for the dollars we've got, there are links that need to be built.
Can I take you back to your vaping just for a moment?
Yes.
Deb is here, Deborah. I don't know if our environmental health officers have a role to play in this at all, certainly from an education point of view and certainly when they go and check the shops. Can you make a quick comment on that, please?
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. As you said, Deborah Howe. I'll take that on notice and speak to the environmental health officers. They would be looking to make sure that people are operating within their permits and licences and, not doing any illegal activity. We're not the police, though. And there are other agencies, though, that our community development team work with. So I'm taking notes. So I've picked up the mental health issue that you've raised. We run a whole range of health and wellbeing programs, and a lot of that is aimed at supporting people with mental health issues and isolation and the like. So I'll join some dots there and certainly take that on notice and speak to my officers about it.
So that's sort of marrying up that, which is really, it's opening it up to where, people from the other side of the mountain can ride across, have a coffee over here. We're generating more business for the, for the businesses here as well. Number 2, gallery walk. So you've stated in the gallery walk stage 1, you've allocated $250,000 for the car park. Once again, just thinking out aloud here, maybe it's a female thing, I don't know. Any chance you could actually make the car park reasonably smooth so that these kids can maybe roller skate / rollerblade on them?
Generally, they're not built with that in mind. The reality of it is when you've got cars moving and kids on rollerblades and other things, that is probably not...
I'm talking outside hours. Do you know what I mean?
Outside of hours.
Yeah. Of course,
Look,
of course. Not during.
I hesitate in saying this, but that does happen when cars aren't there, and realistically, we tend to still build in a way that is specifically for cars, but we understand that those open, smooth areas can certainly attract other uses as well. But we need to be mindful, and we certainly are when we design these things, that if and when people do use it for an alternative use, they can use it in a way that's safe. So you're not having handrails or bollards in places where speed could be created and other things. So yes.
It would be at their own risk. I'm just saying, thinking out loud, obviously.
And that's certainly...
It's just a basic thing. It's just a small change to something, because what we're finding is, and it's not just Tamborine Mountain, we've got to bring family and unity back. And kids, can learn off their parents, because I don't know about you guys, but a lot of us did skate back then, and it's becoming a thing again. So that was question number 2, just the smoothness of it. With the playground, okay, so in primary school, year 6, I beg your pardon, they start, in your budget, you've allocated 157,000. So they begin here where they start to learn volleyball/badminton. The problem we've got, they take it up again in high school, is they can only do it in school. These kids on the mountain, the reason why they're vaping, the reason why we have so much mental health, is there's no activities. So if we're able to allocate some permanent volleyball nets that could be, I believe, in the view of public, so people can see kids playing again. We need to see this. You know, my daughter, you know, she's hockey, surfing, you name it, bike riding, but I get people come up and go, oh, it's so nice to see your child outside playing. We don't see this today. We've got to bring it back.
Sorry, the councillors have certainly given us a clear mission in relation to sporting infrastructure, in relation to the dealing with young people to make them aspire to be the best they possibly can. Now, whether that be encouraging more park runs across the board, whether it means doing more infrastructure from a recreational point of view. Our disadvantage has been we have not had those documents to put to the other levels of government at this point in time. We are now going to have some of those documents, and once they sort out their funding programs, we'll be able to use those as justification for the type of activities you're speaking about.
So if there is a problem here, can you as a council sometimes with your suppliers say, okay, this is how much it's going to cost for a volleyball net, and if it doesn't happen, care of the council, that we at least can arrange donations, fundraising, etc., to get the jobs done?
That would be.
I'm not a sit-around wait person.
No, that's
by
all
the
right.
way.
I get that feeling. I think if you do fundraising, it's not uncommon for clubs to turn around and say we'll raise a certain half, etc., and go from there. The way we operate and the way it will be dictated's the wrong word, outlined within the Ross planning document will be this is your number one priority, and the reasons are there are no change rooms. If we go back to lighting, for example, as Councillor Chalk knows, there are no lights at Coronation Park at all, and in Boona. And last night we heard that Selwyn Park no longer has a men's soccer team anymore because the lights there are not good enough. So we've got that coming from every direction, and the councillors have been very clear about what we're to do.
So just with what this gentleman next to us was talking about, obviously, you know, there's no budget for a new pool, etc. I really strongly think, like we had a really hot Easter this year, just the extension of times.
Can I just say, be really, really careful with new swimming pools.
No.
No.
The
times are good. Okay.
We're just pushing for times, right? Because the problem we've got here is there's so many people. So I've been through cancer. Swimming is one of the greatest things you can do for lymphedema and also mental health. And that's just not just for people that are ill, but elderly, but just getting children out and about. Yeah. Don't worry, I will be in touch. And insofar as I'd really like to know when the next cemetery is coming and where it's going to be.
Hi there, my name's Mick Angus. I'm the President of the Tamborine Mountain Sports Association. Look, I'm here today in my capacity representing our 10 member clubs, which are soon to be 13. We have over 1,000 registered members at the Long Road site and their families, and we're responsible for managing and maintaining the site at Long Road and the council assets there at the Long Road Sports Centre on behalf of our community, our broader region, on behalf of visitors, event organisers and international film companies and our local council. Through a survey approach, we've got a bunch of questions which I'll put to you. There's also a number of our members here today that have questions as well. So if you'll bear with me, there's a couple of questions in here. Firstly, I'd like to thank Council for having this open forum. We do appreciate that. I'd also like to highlight that we have recently been recipients of $200,000 from Council, which was from our Capital Seed Fund, which is currently being assigned to remediation and repairs by the Council at the Long Road site. So we're very grateful for this contribution to the upkeep of the centre. Having said that, reviewing the capital budget, we see there's no ongoing allocation for the Long Road Sports Centre or precinct next year. Despite Council approving the 7-stage master plan last year and having set aside a rolling capital seed fund some time ago, which obviously we've allocated this year to some funds. My question to Council is, what is the ongoing commitment to sport and recreation on the mountain, and specifically the Long Road Sports Centre?
Certainly, over a number of years ago, there was very little actually allocated within the budget for the sporting infrastructure. Like I said, a lot of the leases and other things that have been drawn up have been drawn up with the view that sporting organisations and clubs and community groups actually do their own fundraising. We provide the land, they provide the support to maintain and add to the structures that are there. That we're seeing a shift in that. But to actually to fund that shift means, as Oliver pointed out, we need to then balance what we either increase rates or we lessen the level of service somewhere else. And I guess that's why we're here tonight, to get the feedback around where is the and certainly. Well, and I'm not going to talk on behalf of the councillors here, but certainly I've got the impression and certainly working towards putting the options in front of council around what it looks like as a staged approach to improving infrastructure, and certainly doing the infrastructure review for community facilities, sporting facilities, as well as our camping facilities was the first step, and then having a sport and rec plan after that. Where the future lies and amount of funding, certainly we will be looking long and hard at what opportunities come from other levels of government to actually, but what we're concentrating on now is making sure when those announcements are there, we're actually positioned in the right position. That's why council supports the TMSA and their master plan, because it shows a vision of the future of what that site would look like, and the stage development that goes into that.
Thanks, Chris, for that. The TMSA master plan is a 7-stage. There is a stage 7 of that is an Olympic-sized swimming pool. What we face as an organisation is, at this stage, we have no club room for any sport on the entire mountain. We have not at this stage met our 2010 to 2020 strategic intention, so we look forward to that Ross Planning report. We notice on page 28 of the draft budget, there's the first reference of the Lupton Road Sports Centre in Bow Desert, with an allocation of $5 million via the PCIP funding, with another allocation of $10 million found on page 31. This was a surprise to us as TMSA. We were not aware of this. That certainly hadn't been communicated. So can you just give us some insight into what that is actually for?
A number of years ago, council undertook a strategic land purchase, understanding that a fairly large growth corridor surrounds Bow Desert, and the sporting infrastructure there is, like a lot of other locations, not up to the challenge of meeting the community needs into the future. Certainly we are in the process right at this point in time of undertaking a first stage design of Lupton Road. So it's a piece of land that's actually just to the west of Bow Desert, and it's around understanding and meeting the needs of the community moving forward in that part of the region. Certainly what you see there is actually in the 10-year program has associated assumptions of matched funding or additional funding from other sources. it certainly wouldn't be able to go ahead without that funding, but we certainly need to have some level of planning in our 10-year program to address what is coming down the pipeline as far as development in and around Bay Desert.
Thanks, Chris. Given that Council is undertaking that planning at the moment, and that the TMSA master plan over the last 6 years, having presented at Council 7 times, we have presented that, where would we find the capital, where would we find a similar kind of investment or allocation in capital funding in the budget?
Yeah, it's currently not there, but we actually, at the moment, there is a sporting facility. Yes, it doesn't quite match the needs of the community.
Sorry, are you talking about the current?
It's the current one here at TMSA.
Okay,
and a number of sporting fields, but as it with its growth won't be able to maintain with the level of sporting fields that it currently has, won't be able to service the need into the future. So we are still constrained by the amount of funds we have, and certainly if we were able to source further funding, there would be certainly an ability to look at other improvements within the sporting realm within the region.
Thanks, Chris. So what you've just told me there is that you currently don't have the funds as council to invest, but you're seeking funding on behalf of that planning that you're undertaking in Bay Desert. Can you tell me, is it council itself that is driving that initiative, or is there some other organisation like TMSA from a volunteer not-for-profit organisation driving that planning and strategy, or is that council itself?
At the moment, it's council itself.
Okay.
But the structure in which we actually follow that moving forward is yet to be determined.
Thanks very much. Chris, is somebody in council driving similarly from a Tamborine Mountain perspective the agenda for the long road sports? What I'm saying is we can see where council is driving that. At the moment, the TMSA, as a volunteer not-for-profit organisation, is driving the planning, the strategy, the seven-part development. What we'd love to see from council, and from the point that you've iterated where sporting organisations do bits and pieces of development and it becomes a long-term cost problem. What we're keen to do is get out in front, build, strategise and have that vital infrastructure up here for much needed sports. Is there somewhere in council that's happening for Long Road?
Not specifically, but more generally. We actually have a facilities manager that's, or management of facilities coordinator that has recently come on board. Part of his task is actually to undertake and understand the needs not only of our major centres in our class Tamborine, and certainly understanding that not all sporting organisations have the ability to have that future direction and future understanding of where they need to be in 2, 3, 5 and 10, maybe 20 years' time.
Thanks, Chris. Look, you mentioned a number of times the Ross planning document due in 2 weeks. We understand that Ross Planning also did some consultation with our sporting groups and across the region. That was delivered, we understand, to council last year. We also understand that contained within that document was about an estimation put forward of about $11 million of work just to bring everything in the region up to standard and up to spec. I hadn't heard about the most recent document that you talk about, but where in the budget is that $11 million in terms of bringing up all those regions up to spec?
It's not yet in the budget. We're still going through the finalisation of that review. Certainly need to update some of the cost estimates as well. It's more an informing document to understand that where the best value for money is in investment. And realistically, I'm not in a position to actually make comment any further than when we actually look at future investment moving forward. But you are correct, there is quite a substantial backlog of works to get things into a usable, well, they're currently being used, but to an appropriate standard.
Great, thanks, Chris. Look, just a couple more questions. The 2010 to 2020 strategy for council in terms of the Scenic Rim sporting strategy, it presumed that the Long Road sports facility would be completed, and of course it hasn't been, and we don't have any club room. There's no club room. I think I mentioned that on the entire mountain. We just wanted to reiterate the point that Tamborine Mountain has no sporting club room for any of its sporting clubs across the mountain, and one of the largest sports clubs on the mountain, basketball, has, with 180 members currently and growing, has no facility at all. So there's an overwhelming need for sport and sporting infrastructure, and as you've rightly pointed out, when that infrastructure doesn't present, then we lose sport and activity. We're very fortunate to have an active sporting community, driving development, driving participation here, so that we don't further provide further costs. We actually costs and a dilapidation of resources. We see that value for money here on Tamborine Mountain is very much welcome in terms of an investment in that kind of infrastructure. What we don't understand is why it's not in the budget, given all the work we've done, and why there is an allocation for Lupton Street, which we don't have a problem with Beaudesert having that kind of infrastructure, but why it's not been represented here on Tamborine Mountain.
So Mick, what normally happens is once you get a document such as a Ross planning document, that'll be referred back into a budget process. The Capital Works program is not static. It will change as opportunities come through, whether that be from funding, whether that be from the community, undertaking advocacy with the councillors, and why we're doing this meeting here now, to understand those aspects. Again, is the Capital Works program locked in stone? No. Are there opportunities once there is strategic documentation that is with different parts or different communities to put that up? Certainly, that'd be a great thing to happen. So it's a matter of identifying those priorities, seeing where they can be funded. What we will try to do as officers is say, okay, let's see if we can put that in year 3, but don't forget, there's a guy who was talking about the footpaths. Don't forget, there is another person talking about the other competing
we understand that, yeah. We definitely understand that. I guess what I'm really trying to bring to council's attention is that an investment in infrastructure, an investment in the maintenance and support of the Long Road site is actually a long-term economic and cultural benefit to not only the Scenic Rim, but to our Tamborine Mountain and its surrounding communities. I'll leave it there. I know there's some other questions, but thanks.
Hi, my name's Terry Day. Joe and I live on the Shelf Road, and there's a lot of serious issues regarding the Shelf Road, but I just want to talk about one of them, only one at the moment. The council park where Energex has planted so many thousand trees, which is great, helping with the environment to offset other things that Energex do in other places. But what it's ending up as, a funnel where people are parking there. The recent investigation by council, the geotechnical investigation, has pierced the underground stream, which is keeping mud permanently underneath the middle of the Shelf Road. But what's worse is that many people, sometimes a dozen cars on each day on a weekend, people will go down and the council park work as a funnel, and it takes them across private property where there surely has to be liability issues if there's an accident or whatever. They walk across the private property and they get to the big waterfalls. So they get to Wire Rope Falls and Little Red Falls and so on. Now, all of those people here who've snuck down there over the years, you'll know that it can be pretty dangerous. And especially if little kids are down there, there are no barricades. If people want to yahoo and jump into the water from the cliffs, that's fine, but eventually there's going to be a tragedy. Now, then on top of that, and I say that council has a responsibility to point these things out in signage at the entrance to that park, and something has to be done about it. And I'm asking that happen, and I'm asking it in a public situation now because I'm going to continue, and I want everybody to know that I'm going to continue on with it. Now, the other thing is, just very recently, there was a sighting of a spotted-tailed quoll on our property on Guanabar Creek, and right at the top of the old waterfall that collapsed in 74 called Secluded Falls. And it's a reliable witness. We've taken with council officer cameras down there, and we've picked up several endangered species, but we couldn't catch the spotted-tailed quoll. But we're going back down as soon as this rain finishes and set the cameras up again. But one of the problems is that when people walk down through there and there's danger around those waterfalls, many of them then walk out up the creek, up Guanabar Creek, climb Secluded Falls, which is a dangerous thing to do. And if people are not aware, who are either unfit or they've got little kids with them, there could easily be a tragedy at Secluded Falls. And they walk right through the area where the spotted-tailed quoll was sighted. Now, these things are so endangered that, you know, to have them in our midst, to know that there's enough forest and wilderness left on Tamborine Mountain, surely is something that needs to be looked after, protected and taken care of. Those people then walk through those areas where the quoll was sighted and will oftentimes walk out through our place, which is not that bad because we're happy for people to walk on our property. That's fine. But it's not the right thing to be doing, to be walking right through an area of wilderness where there are rare and endangered species that have been identified by responsible, reputable people. We want to be able to chase that up and see if we can work with council to get something done about that whole situation.
Certainly, I've made some notes of that, and certainly if council officers are aware of it, we'll certainly follow that up for you. And thank you for providing that to us tonight.
I'm Judith Rowland, President of Tamborine Mountain Land Care, and I know that situation very well, Terry. We do work on that particular council land, and I have reported the gate that has been continually broken at the top of that council site. There's a wooden gate, we've put padlocks on it twice, and someone has come through at weekends and sawed the padlocks off. That has been reported to council a couple of times. They said they would put bollards all the way across. That will only stop the vehicles going down, and really the vehicles shouldn't be going down because there's been a lot of slippage. It's been by geologists reported that there's continual slippage down that track, and I think people, because they break through those padlocks, are still going down with their vehicles down to where Terry was saying about the waterfalls. And I have also asked for signage to be put up to say that it's a dangerous situation. And we get on very well with the Council Environmental Department. There's no problem there. We've worked on many of, in fact, 20 reserves Land Care has regenerated, so we really want to preserve all the endangered species. That particular project, we had a fauna survey done, and apart from the quoll, we did find lyrebirds, powerful owls. It was done by reputable fauna surveys, so that is a very, very special place, and we want to keep it the way it is. And I'm continually disappointed by the number of cars that you see there at weekends. They're not local people, I'm sorry. They're people that have probably put it on Instagram to say these beautiful waterfalls, and they are going across private property. And I'm not sure why the owner of that property hasn't done anything about it by putting up signs, private property. So I think now it's council's responsibility at the actual top of the site where the people are going in to say, the point is they can go on the public land, but then they shouldn't be going on the private land down to the waterfall. So I don't know what else we could do, but there should be something there to say
Certainly, yeah,
private
we've
property.
taken note of that, and
Thank
certainly
you.
we'll follow that up. Deborah wants to say. Oh, yes, so Deborah, it's actually part of the customer, and certainly follow that. Thanks, Deborah.
I'm going to go next. My name is Denise Hayes. This was touched on earlier. I just want to know, where do we find within the budget the $750,000 of council funding that has been awarded for lighting infrastructure, and what portion of that will go to Tamborine Mountain? You've talked about lighting before.
The actual money is in the current budget financial year. So there's $750,000 was actually allocated for sporting improvements. Both Selwyn Park at Bow Desert and Coronation Park have sufficient lighting to undertake nighttime sport events. So council is actually trying to utilise that money as in conjunction with a grant application that we put in for both those sites. And at this point in time, that $750,000 will potentially be totally used up on those applications for those two sites.
So there's no funding for us to access?
Just at this point in time, but certainly, as discussed earlier, the budget is somewhat flexible, and the whole idea of when I say flexible, that future out years, if the community need is certainly to look at improved services in a particular area, we certainly will look at how that shapes up within the budget.
Sorry, Chris, if I can just ask a question here. Just in terms of that 750,000, I appreciate it's going to those two centres. When you say all 750 is being allocated, how many light towers are being used on each one of those?
Look, I'd have to take that question on notice. I don't know the exact detail of that, but certainly it was to get to a certain standard of to be able to allow for a certain number of sports to be able to be played on those sites.
When we were speaking with Scott, he mentioned 300 lux being the recommendation for night cricket. Our recommendation was that wasn't a priority for us. And certainly Tamborine Mountain could do with the lights. We were happy to do it at 150 lux, and our estimation of costs were around about 120,000 for 4 LED lighting poles to be erected up here. So yeah, I was just interested in terms of the costings.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to talk in more detail with you later if you like.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kayleen Power. Chris and Oliver, we don't actually know your surnames, we weren't formally introduced. I have 2 questions. One is, and I'm not sure if people know, if you know it off the top of your head, what proportion of the rate base does Tamborine Mountain provide to the overall rate base of the council area? The Mayor's having a furious... Were you writing that down? Does anybody know that?
I do.
Okay. And it is?
And generally we don't deal with it because, I mean, obviously it's one region. But in all when we talk about, not specifically in the localities, but in division terms, all 6 divisions contribute pretty much equally across the board. And obviously you've got varying breakup of residential, commercial, rural and everything else. But pretty much they're within, there's no significant Tamborine Village or Division 5 very low. They're all pretty much around that equal figure. So that's why we sort of, undertook that exercise to try and squash that perception.
Okay. So on the assumption that that's the case, it's fairly equal, does the mountain receive a commensurate amount of CapEx funding year after year after year?
There's probably a strategic way of answering it, and I guess it's an asset management approach, and I'm certainly happy to. Yeah,
look, year on year, I'd tend to look at grouping out on a 10-year cycle, because what you'll see is a certain need, and it may end up being in one particular area for a couple of years in a row. Look, I'm not in a position to be able to say exactly tonight, but I know that there has been a reasonable amount of capital investment over the last 4 years, whether it's commensurate on a percentage basis, but it's actually been delivered one through an asset management process that takes into account the whole region, but also on certain strategies, one of them being the Vibrant Active Towns and Villages, where that saw some work being done at the top end of Gallery Walk, as well as the library purchase and certainly work on Main Street. So as well as footpaths and other pieces of infrastructure, as well as a reseal program and asphalting works.
Okay, so I can appreciate that in varying years there'll be different needs, and varying places within the council area would be of a higher priority. I think we can all accept and acknowledge that. That's only fair and equitable. But over a 10-year period, would you say that the mountain is receiving its share of the rate base that it contributes? And you don't have to answer that. I guess it's a rhetorical question. It's something we all would want to know.
There is a variable answer to that, and one of the things that I'm constantly reminded by my team, and I noticed it when I walked in here, is the red soil. It actually has a bearing capacity, and I'm going to start talking like an engineer, so someone will kick me soon. The bearing capacity of it means you don't need to actually spend as much money to actually deliver a suitable road surface for vehicles to drive on. So, whereas in some other areas, we have to build almost a metre or more of pavement to actually be able to bridge the weight of vehicles driving on those. So, to do a direct comparison is sometimes, yes, there are other variables other than just X number of dollars spent on the road here. May be a lesser cost than spending it at another location that has
I
poor
guess we
bearing
do
capacity.
give the council a savings in sewage collection and treatment, though, so
Well-
perhaps factor that in.
Well-
I do have a second question.
Sorry,
I recognise
just
we're
on
running
that,
out of time. Okay, sorry, Chris.
we don't manage water or sewage.
Okay,
That's
sorry,
managed through urban
stand
utilities.
corrected on that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's fine. My second question is a more detailed one, and it's once we've decided we've got a budget of X amount and we've got projects in mind and we've all agreed they're the best ones to have, what level of oversight does council provide to delivering those projects on time, within budget and to specification? Everyone in this room can point to projects on our mountain that have overrun, probably not supervised very well. I can point to the one at Staff Smith Park over in Eagle Heights, a new toilet block, no drainage, it floods when we get big rain coming through, and the transpiration pit was put right out into the cricket pitch. There's now bollards and it's rendered the cricket pitch useless, so local kids can't even play there. So my question is what level of oversight in project management and infrastructure delivery does council provide?
For each project, we do actually have a project management team that looks after it. Okay, we certainly in some instances have to balance out the operational costs. To actually undertake a pump out on a toilet, because there is no sewer on Tamborine Mountain, that ongoing operational costs, you have to balance that with being able to treat on site. Talking specifics there, yes, and we more recently there was a section of footpath laid that wasn't laid to the correct standard. That was picked up by the team that manages that. It wasn't able then to be able to be connected in appropriately to driveway crossovers, as well as it wasn't compliant to allow all abilities to successfully manoeuvre on that path. So that was picked up, and that was at the cost of the contractor to actually go in and do that. Unfortunately, concrete at a premium. I didn't cry, but I felt like it when I heard that they had to rip it up.
Phil Gifford. I have two questions. The first, who sets the policies that underlie the distribution of funds? For example, on Tamborine Mountain, it is predominantly a residential area, but the residents have supported tourism for a long time. But now the big ticket items all seem to be directed at promotion of more tourism. And that is going to require a lot more infrastructure that will ultimately have to be paid for by residents. So my question is, who sets the policies that decide which items are to be raised for consideration?
Thank you for the question.
Council going to apply some funding or even effort to having this anomaly corrected? Thank you.
Thank you again for the question. It's a good one. That'll get picked up as part of advocacy. The role of hospitals is really important to any community. It will be difficult to get a hospital, in my experience, but aiming for something like a 24-hour clinic is an option that you could be looked at, but that's advocacy to state government.
Thank you. Harvey Ruglan. The question number one is on rates. Where you've got properties of similar type but located in different areas, so on Mount Tamborine you might have a three-bedroom home which is valued at twice what it is in Beaudesert or elsewhere. How is that taken into account in the calculations that you do with your rate calculations?
Yeah, so that's carried out in for example, it's a owner-occupied. So all those owner-occupied principal place of residence in Category 1. So they all apply with the same rate in the dollar, and the valuation of the individual properties are in effect. So you may have, as you said, a three-bedroom property in Tamborine Mountain valued at $500,000. At that particular point in time, the rate in the dollar will go into effect, and the valuation will apply to the rate in the dollar set. If you have for example, a three-bedroom property in Beaudesert, and it has a valuation of $200,000, and I believe I think the minimum general rate only applies when the valuation of the property hits $240,000. So the minimum general rate would apply to that, which is set on each in individual categories.
So effectively what you're saying is that by setting the minimum rate, it equalises them out.
It's not an equal science, as obviously in setting that, you're getting fluctuations. We've seen a number of years where the revaluation is in effect, especially in previously. There's been some stabilisation where the major centres has seen a same level of increase. 3 years ago, we saw where Tamborine Mountain, the valuations went up 40-50%, and elsewhere in the region they didn't go up at all, and that was based on market factors. So there was some anomaly in there where, in that particular instance, you would have seen a lot of the higher valued properties in Tamborine would have got actually a reduction in rates, because the grouping, we've got about 11,000 properties in Category 1. So you would have seen, whilst the minimum general rate was set, the rate in the dollar would have decreased. It's a weird science to explain that without a blackboard, but I can certainly provide you more information to it.
Okay, but in summary, the various properties compared with each other would be paying about the same amount in rates?
Not necessarily. In terms of the valuations, they would. But
yeah, no, but I mean a three-bedroom home on Tamborine Mountain compared with a three-bedroom home in Beaudesert, would they be paying about the same in rates?
As long as the valuations is similar.
No, that's what I'm saying.
It's not. No, the valuation is in effect, is a driving factor in there.
Could I suggest that be taken into account in the way you calculate your rates?
It's easier said than done.
But I'm told that there used to be a banding system in the past, which is no longer applied.
There used to be a banding. I believe I've only come into the council in the last 4 or 5 years, and I didn't have banding in there. It's a council decision. We can certainly take that on notice and then bring that up as a point of discussion. But the notion around banding hasn't been brought back in the last 4 years.
Okay. Unless that's done, there'll be a big difference between the rates paid in those localities, not because of a difference in the property, but because of the different valuations that have been applied.
Yeah, you would have seen a strategy that's sort of deployed by council in what's called the community infrastructure charge. That's a fixed charge, and it's regardless of the valuation of each property. What council has done over the last number of years has increased that, but also decreased the reliance on the application of the general rate being applied on the valuation. So what we're seeing, that community infrastructure charge is a set charge regardless of the valuation of the property. Each property contributes the community infrastructure charge, and the purpose of that community infrastructure charge at the current purpose is solely to fund the roads and transport infrastructure charges. But
okay. Different topic. Interest received on your chart is shown as 4% of total revenue, and actual interest received is 3.4 million, page 24. What's the value of the assets that you're getting interest on? Because that seems to be a very high figure.
the value is only the amounts of dollars that we've got in investment. At the moment, if you listen into the monthly financial reports, we do have an anomaly where we've had some disruptions in delivery of our capital programs, which has meant that we've had an extraordinary, a high level of cash in a bank. Ordinarily, when you set the budget, you expect that what's set in the budget that year will be spent in that year, so we won't have that sitting in our investment account attracting interest. We do have a set amount of cash that we call the working capital fund, where one of the ratio indicates that that should be sitting around the $16, $20 million. So what we earn in terms of interest, and I don't know which particular we're referencing, but that's what effectively we have is cash at bank is what the interest is acquiring.
That's what I'm getting at, because 3.4 million at, say, 4%, you'd need round about 100 million. Am I correct in that?
Yes, you would in that.
So that's your total revenue. You can't have that in your cash account for the whole year.
No, I'll just have to see which point. I might see which figure you're referring to. I just haven't got the figure in front of me at the moment.
It just struck me that it didn't seem right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll take that over notice and I'll grab that figure from you.
All right. I'm not all that conversant with the various ratios that you've quoted: the operating surplus ratio, net financial liabilities ratio, leverage ratio, but they all seem to be heading, in my interpretation, in a position where it's going from good to better to best. Am I correct in that? It assumes that we are actually in the forward years getting better and better in our financial position. Is that correct?
As part of our prudent long-term financial planning, that's where you want to head to. Obviously, not taking into account any shocks to the market or any of those anomalies that would come about, then certainly that would impact that. But for all intents and purposes of trying to set the forward budgets, you do try and set something that's within those parameters.
Okay. The point I'm getting at is, though, that we're using this year as the base for the forward years, and if our ratios are improving all the time, does that mean that the amount that we're getting in revenue is too high, or we've overstated the expenditure? What is the reason for it going into a continually improved basis?
Whilst it appears to go into a continually improving basis, as the CEO pointed out previously, we had a number of years where we've had deficit budgets. So we're actually, and that's included, there's been a compounding impact to that. That's tried to result into us getting into those metrics of within those bounds. Now, within the forward years, what we've said in terms of expenditure is meeting what we've got in terms of forecasted revenue, in terms of trying to balance the books. So we're not, if there's more expenditure that's required as opposed to the expenditure coming in, it's just sitting in there in that it's an indicative figure at the moment in terms of basically the forward years are in indexation of the current year. So if you're indexing revenue at a 3.5% increase and 1.5% growth, and you're increasing revenue at expenditure at 4%, you sort of, you start to build that basis for some surplus. But that's only a forecast, and as any, unless you've got a good crystal ball to predict all those future years within 10 years.
The last one is a general comment. The statement of financial position shows an accumulated surplus of $774 million. Does that indicate that in the past we've been paying or being charged too much for our rates?
No.
So how does it get to a surplus of that amount?
I don't see where I'm looking at the statement of financial position.
Page 25. Shows an accumulated surplus of $774 million.
Sorry, that's the balance sheet. So that's a accumulated surplus of the council, including all assets, not cash.
So it's not a cash surplus?
No.
Righto.
No, and that's what Chris pointed out before. As a council, you can see in there that the non-current assets, which are all our assets, are around the 1.183 billion. So you've got the revenue aspects up the top and the expenditure down the bottom, which give you that.
That explains it, thank you.
If we had $1 billion in cash, we would be funding a lot more of the community infrastructure that's been touted tonight.
Hi guys, Vaughan Roy here. Thank you for coming out tonight, guys. In the draft, I see an allocation of 107,000 every 2 years for sports and recreational upgrades. I was wondering, how can we get some of that budget to TMSA, and what is the process that we need to take to be able to secure some of that funding for ongoing maintenance and upgrades of the sports facility?
It's certainly an unallocated capital allocation at this point in time. As I said previously, we've certainly done the infrastructure review of the current assets that are sitting on council land. Well, from that, we'll have a prioritised list that will then inform where that money is spent. Look, I think I'm going to go out on a limb here as an officer and say that it is an indicative amount that has been allocated within the future years, but understanding that that's nowhere near enough to actually fund the desires moving forward, as well as understanding that once we get the sport and rec plan on board as well, that there'll be other pressures on the volume of dollars that is considered appropriate to be allocated to that asset class or that facility funding area.
Okay, and with that sports and rec person, when they come on board, how are we to go about contacting them? And
I think that we've got contacts for TMSA and every other sporting group that would certainly make themselves known to those that we have current contacts for. So I think they'll be contacting you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Hello, Adam Chander, Tamborine Mountain Sports Association and Tamborine Mountain Basketball. Look, it's great to see such a proposed investment made to the Lupton Road Sports Precinct down in Bow Desert. Just a curiosity at that $15 million that's been proposed over the next 6 years. Why has there been such a significant focus put to such a significant investment over any line item for investment at TMSA? That's my first question. So my question was, why is there such a considerable investment being made there with nothing?
As I guess I alluded to before, there's an understanding that there's a fair bit of development around Bow Desert, and the facilities there aren't going to meet that demand that will be there. Certainly, we're still going through the planning phases on exactly what is required there, and as mentioned earlier also, that we have a forward plan that will certainly have some level of adjustment. Just because something appears in year 6, it's not always when it will actually be delivered. We have to work to some form of plan moving forward. So certainly I've heard what is being said here tonight about the desires for improved facility at TMSA and other aspects of sporting. So and also that recreation aspect of what council can be involved in from a facility point of view.
Thanks, Chris, and we appreciate Council taking the time to clarify this for us. So has a cost analysis benefit been conducted between the two sites at Lupton Road and TMSA?
That would certainly be part of the process, and most of the projects all of the projects when we go for external funding need to provide some level of cost-benefit analysis on, so the federal government and the state government, when you actually put your application in, they actually want to see the value in investment of the dollars that they put into those projects. So the reality of it is, for each of those projects as they're put together, there will be certainly a cost-benefit analysis as well as value for money outcomes as a result of the money invested.
And has that been a result from the sports strategy?
No, we certainly, for each of the projects that are put forward, that is something that is done. It's not necessarily done till prior years of actually understanding when that project is to be delivered. Certainly an aspect that is done as part of any application we do. So we don't have that sitting in our back pocket for every project that's sitting on the current 10-year program. I'd like to be in a position like that, but certainly there's a level of dollars required to actually get to that point. But generally speaking, before the shovel's put in the ground, that analysis has been undertaken. And can be used to actually which project actually has the better return on another.
Yeah, great. So given the 15 million's been outlined within the budget for Lupton Road, has there been an identified allocation from council to support that funding from federal government?
In the out years, it's always not something that's actually... when the budget's adopted, and I'll look to my friend to my right and Oliver, with regard to understanding when council adopts a budget, they adopt just the 12 months of a budget. So as far as actually it's an indicative allocation for the 10-year planning. It's not necessarily a commitment to those funds. So that's probably, have I used the right words there, Oliver?
Yeah, that's correct, Chris. I guess I'll just point it out. So I guess there's been several references, and if I point into the, I know it's very hard to read, but those have got it on this
It's okay, I'm
particular
familiar with
page.
the document.
There's two lots of items here for $5 million each. So I don't know, there's two lots for those 2 forward years. So the project in total is 10 million.
There's another allocation in the document, I believe 31 or 28, that has the other there's other two allocations of 2.5 million.
Are you referring to this page here, which is the revenue side? So
Potentially, yeah.
So that's the revenue side. That's what Chris is trying to point out.
So 10 mil.
Yeah.
So I redact, I say 10 mil, not 15 mil, but it's still considerable discrepancy between what we see in here and a line item support.
$5 million, and as Chris pointed out, there are 4 years at the moment to balance the budget. There would be a commitment of half that amount, but that project would only go ahead if the funding allocations, and we tried to colour code them, so you'll see there's purple and there's future years here, there's 2 lots of 2.5 that match those years. So if those grants are applied for and they're not successful, then obviously the consideration by council is to whether that goes ahead, because that would require then the full $10 million investment through their own cash, not...
Well, the PCIP funding's already been allocated from election promises, am I correct on that, from previous government?
No, not that far out.
Okay, no worries.
Can I just raise a point? And I just clarify with Chris Gray, and I'll get Oliver to correct me where I'm wrong as well, please. You've got to understand this also takes into account growth. And within the Bow Desert area specifically, there is the LGIP program. Now at the moment, happy to be corrected by Deb, who's down the back, there's 1,000 lots being put in by Villawood, circa 1,000. There's another 1,000 going in with Mormac, circa. And there's at least, pardon me?
900 CO.
Circa.
But close.
Yeah, okay, I was close. They're all subject to LGIP. LGIP is the local government infrastructure charge that comes in that is then allocated to the growth areas. So it will be considered a growth area. There is not a lot of growth that's going to come out of Tamborine Mountain over the next 10 years. But there is going to be growth going through there. With that growth, there'll be an expectation from new communities that they can access some sort of facilities, whether they be community infrastructure or recreation infrastructure. So we need to keep in mind there is money raised through the LGIP program. LGIP is where there is growth, so that would be the funding that fits into there, but that's money taken straight from the developers when they go in to do their trunk infrastructure and other offsets as well. So with Lumpton Road, it is a target for LGIP to actually put that in there and start developing things over a period of time as those populations grow. And as we reach that, and the LGIP policy is currently under review right now and due to be finished probably in about another month, I'm hoping, maybe 2 months. And that will be finished, and that will give us a better indication of what can be forecasted as far as funds raised through LGIP into these sorts of areas as well. That is also, subject to, and I'm sure Deb was just about to tell me, the current review of the Shaping South East Queensland plan, which will then turn around and say, is there more opportunity for a larger urban footprint within Beaudesert or within Boona or within Kalbar? It's unlikely there will be a further extension to any urban footprint within Tamborine Mountain area.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So the council will be taking the 10 million that's allocated through the PCIP funding and putting that as a contribution from Villawood to raise the capital for that precinct. Is that what we sort of understand?
The contribution
potentially, I would say, is the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. I'll move from millions into hundreds of thousands. TMSA was allocated a seed funding grant of $400,000 from council for upgrades for capital works to occur at TMSA. 100,000 of that has previously been allocated to TMSA for ratification of the master plan, which has been endorsed by council. We believe there's an operational budget of 300,000 left that needs to be utilised before the end of financial year, but we've also been informed by council that figure's been reduced to 200,000. So we've been requesting for over the last 8 weeks where that $100,000 has actually gone, and the communication we've had back from council is that it's 200,000 and the other 100,000 doesn't exist. So for ratepayers in this room right now, it would be interesting to know where that $100,000 has been gone, where has it been spent. If it has been spent at TMSA, we'd happily accept that figure and move forward. But for the benefit of our community who are clearly needing considerable sporting infrastructure and community assets available, that'd be interesting to know from council. Thank you.
There is a bit of history with regard to the 400,000 that was allocated to TMSA in a couple of budgets ago. Generally speaking, we try where we can not to continue to reallocate or continue to roll over capital funds where we're not seeing an impetus to actually get that spent. So the reality of it is that money had been rolled over a number of years. This year, it got a refocus because we actually saw the pipeline of work required elsewhere, and some of that money has been spent elsewhere. So the reality of it is that it actually had been sitting there as seed funding, approved in, I'm not going to quote the year, but it was several years ago for seed funding, and there was no commitment moving forward that would, other than the rolling over for 2 or 3 years, maybe even more, and then understanding the review that we undertook, there was needs that potentially that money could be spent elsewhere, and some of that has been.
And so you can't inform the community where that 100,000's been spent?
On sporting infrastructure or planning for sporting infrastructure.
Oh, planning for sporting infrastructure.
Or
Do
planning.
you think it would have been a great I don't know, strategy to actually engage with TMSA to say, hey, we have an issue with this funding being overrolled in the next financial year.
I'm
Perhaps
probably
you
not
could
going to
spend
take up the discussion tonight with regard to that. I'm happy to take that offline as a discussion, because I think there may be other questions relating to other matters that may be wanting to be asked.
I understand, but we represent over 1,000 people in this community.
Yes,
when
but
you quantify that by the ratepayers, with 70% of those houses having the traditional family basis of two parents, you're looking at about representation of about a third of the mountain at a minimum within that one space. So whilst we're squabbling over 100,000, you're happy to commit 10 million out west. So thank you. Your turn, Chris. Sorry.
No, I'm David. That's
Sorry,
Chris.
I'm always backwards.
No worries, Adam.
Thank you.
It's all right. It's important to realise we're talking about next year's budget. Have there things been done? There may be issues with things, how they've been done in the past. What we're trying to do is improve those things now. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So we're putting that step forward to make sure that there is consultation about this. The points have been made very clear. The same points around sporting infrastructure were made last night in Bow Desert. Exactly the same. And questions are asked by them are, why do other areas get more money than us? Which the same question's getting asked. This is where the councillors have the challenge to try and incorporate everything into a draft budget. And it's difficult to meet the expectations of everyone. So if we can look at how we time this out, how we make sure we can get funding, how we have the strategic documents in place, that then allows us to have realistic expectations about what can be delivered. There's a lady here who's had her hand up 5 times.
Last question.
No,
Last one.
no more questions.
It's around the circular economy that the Mayor raised at the Boona meeting, and I think it's a great concept to actually reduce the burden of council when approaching state and federal governments for funding and support. How do we go about a process in terms of working on some circular economy concepts that would support council whilst we improve our community infrastructure?
So I'll refer you very quickly to the council website where there is an expression of interest that has been advertised at this point in time for interested parties to look at the Bromelton area, including the landfill, which still has another 100 to 200 years left in it. That expression of interest is looking at how, and it specifically mentions the circular economy within that document. We are looking for partners, we are looking for people as investors to go into that, to see how waste can be best treated in the near future and in the long term. So I would direct you to that one immediately. Have a look and you'll see what's outlined through there as well.
Yeah, I don't know.
This lady.
I've got a couple of questions now that sort of relate to the gentlemen that have all stood up. My first one is, can we take money from another area can we change how you spend your money and put it somewhere else? Like, can something that's spent on, I'm going to say Gallery Walk, be spent somewhere else? Now, Adam's talking about, no, I'm sorry, this gentleman from the Sporting Association said that he needed 120,000 for lighting, and there's 125,000 here for this year's budget allocated to Gallery Walk. Now, Phil Giffard also talked about residents' opinions compared to tourism or commercial opinions. Agreed? So I'm sort of wondering why the money is spent on something that possibly isn't really interesting the residents so much.
So again, sorry, Oliver.
Put it in an email and send it along to council.
This is why the
And,
consultation...
okay, my next thing is consultation doesn't always end up as action, because already the sporting people have been allocated 400,000 that has now become 300,000, and I like to think that what's promised is promised before you start spending it elsewhere. So I can see 125,000 sitting here that I don't think should be spent. I don't know if I'm the only one that thinks that. Maybe I am. I don't know. But why start promising it to other people when you haven't fulfilled the promise to... Does this make sense? Am I the only one that thinks this way? No. We all should send an email and then we get a reply saying it doesn't fit in the budget, but...
Your first question around can a budget be changed is yes, but it can only be changed through a formal process of identifying those particular changes through council. When we said about this budget, we only put in that revenue stream funding that we're guaranteed of. Now, if council, through miracles of federal and Queensland government elections coming up, and they've got their checkbooks out and offering additional funding, and they come about, then certainly we can activate other projects in those forward years, forwards. But similarly for additional activation by the teams within council in seeking other sources of funding and whatnot, then yeah, when we go to set the budget at the start of the year, we've got a set amount of revenue, and we've got to try and balance the
I think I know that Long Road is not a new activity. It's existing.
No.
The 400,000 was promised.
Yep, and that's what Chris explained.
I'm a little bit shocked that it goes elsewhere.
That was in a previous budget, that allocation towards a particular amount. In that particularly that was spent, that wasn't expended for a number of years.
And would the people of the association been told at that time, if it's not spent by the 30th of June, you've lost it?
I believe there's been some communication about it. I'm not 100% sure. So
I have to take that question on notice because I rely on officers to have those conversations.
Good practice from a financial perspective would be not to have carryovers that are ratepayers' money. The only time you should have the carryovers is when they're actually connected to state or government funding. State or federal government funding. Therefore, money put in there, remember, it's not necessarily council's capital, it's another party's capital that's going in there, should be, so therefore it becomes operational coming out of us. That is not meant to be carried forward, and the funds are meant to be expended.
Would you say that the last few years, because of COVID, have been strange for trying to implement programs within? Is that why it wasn't spent?
No, the COVID. Yeah, COVID can be used as a blame for a lot of things, but in the end, you just got to get on with things. So, yes, COVID has impacted us indirectly by the cost of goods that have gone up, the supply chains that are there, the lack of staff to recruit, and the lack of contractors out there who are going to give you realistic prices.
Okay. I think that's it for me then. I think that's it, yeah.
Hello, David and Chris, is it? Thanks for consultation time. It's very appreciated. My name is Jane McGough. I'm the Vice President of the Tamborine Mountain Arts Collective, and we're a not-for-profit volunteer organisation. We've been running for nearly 10 years or so, but under kind of a fresh committee in the past year or two. We all know that there are a large amount of artists living on the mountain for our population, and we have a real vision to see Mount Tamborine as more of a music and cultural destination. We've been advocating, or in the past they've been advocating to council for some kind of hub, and we're particularly interested in some kind of retail collective art space. I've just got two questions. First one is a simple one. What is happening with the old library? With the new development they're obviously going into the IGA. There's a fantastic space there that obviously could benefit the community and a lot of artists. We're wondering what's happening with that.
I will answer that, but I might rely on Deborah to provide some. She's just typing the question down. Thank you, Deborah. Certainly, we're in the position of looking at what will be the best use of that space, and certainly able to take your feedback on that. We certainly have had other feedback about what that space could be used for, but it is certainly a good position to be in to have floor space in Main Street that could be used for either council operations or other facilities. But that decision has not yet been made on what actually is going to be utilised in that space. And I'll hand to Deborah to talk more about the art side of.
Thanks. So the new Tamborine Mountain Library, which will hopefully come online end of June when we finish the works there, also has a makerspace that's been developed within it. Will be developed within it, so we're hoping to be able to engage more closely with groups such as yours to utilise that in a much better way. We're also looking at improvements to an outdoor area to provide additional space to supplement the new library. As Chris said, the balance of the library that is there now that will relocate across, there is some further work to be done in the planning on that. And we've recently had considerable grants to upgrade not just that library space, but also the Vonda Youngman Centre as well. So you'll see some improved facilities in there. So we're happy to keep those conversations going, but I think you need to put forward what you would envisage your requirements are for the hub that you just talked about, so that we can consider that as a part of this process.
Okay, and what kind of time frame do we have around that?
The 4th of May is when this closes. Oliver outlined that at
Wednesday,
the beginning.
3rd of May, next Wednesday.
3rd of
about
May,
a week,
sorry.
less than a week, yeah. Okay.
It doesn't need to be War and Peace. You just can put down in your dot points the vision that you just basically outlined then.
Okay,
So,
thank you. My second question is just simply that you've allocated 1.5 million towards cultural services. I'm just wondering how much of that comes to Mount Tamborine, being that you already have a cultural centre, a very good cultural centre in Bow Desert. But considering that the amount of artists in our population is very high, how much comes to Mount Tamborine and how much of that goes towards actually supporting and developing arts culture, as in music and artists and performance? Yeah.
I don't have I couldn't stand here tonight and give you the exact breakdown, but what I can say is through our RADF grants and the other development programs that we have, we see quite a number of grants come from the artists up here on the mountain. And they've been generally very successful, and I think you probably know some of those yourself, Bronwyn Davies and others. And that's the very reason why we got the grants to improve the Vonda Youngman Centre, because we knew that was some aged infrastructure there, didn't have the right facilities. So that was about enabling that centre to shift maybe a little bit more from being a community centre to being more like a cultural centre. So the team is working on that. The councillors in this current year actually allocated additional staff to be able to operate the Vonda Youngman Centre and support further. We have a community grants program that people can apply to, and we also have regional events to keep the conversation going with you. And I think you've probably met some of our team, Linda and Mark and others that do some exceptional work in this community, like the murals at Vonda Youngman, and working with the arts as much as possible. Our aim is that where we have projects that we go out to do things like those murals, that we want to see those expressions of interest come in from local artists so that they get the work. Artists need to be paid properly for the work that they do.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name's Julie Wilkinson. I'll give you a relatively easy question to make you all relax a little bit. It's regarding Hartley Road, which is one of the heavily trafficked roads on the mountain and probably throughout the Scenic Rim. There's 3 tourist attractions, there's 3 water carriers, there's a high school, and there's a fire and ambulance traffic coming out on that road. The road is 0.9 kilometres long between Long Road and Main Western Road. And recently it was asked of the council to put that road on a significant major road list to have some change the category to make it upgraded. Has that happened?
Not as yet. There's a whole process that is followed. You're talking about getting that road put on as recognised as a local road of regional significance, and I am aware of the resolution of council. Certainly have been involved. We as a council are joined with Ipswich City and Lockyer Valley in a regional roads group. It's that group that then, and we're currently doing an analysis of all the roads that are within the that are categorised as local roads of regional significance, and certainly Hartley Road and a number of other roads within the region are certainly being looked at to be as as their relevance to be included as part of local roads of regional significance. So the reality of it is that process does take some time, unfortunately, but certainly it not excluded at this stage.
Thank you.
Hi, look, I know there's been talk previously, so I won't flog a dead horse. But just for clarification, the capital seed funding at Long Road, the 400,000 allocation, the communication we had from council was that it would be a rolling fund until such time as we would find appropriate state and federal funding. For just for your information, David, that was what we were told, and we were under that impression.
I can only go by the council reports. It's not included in the council report.
Well, I certainly have it in the minutes of our meetings, and I certainly have it in emails. The reason it hasn't been spent, and I think this needs to be clear, and it probably relates to why there's been a lot of questions around that, is the important is because we require a sports strategy. For those significant fundings, as you'll know, state and federal, we need to be aligned with council and with council sports strategy. That sports strategy, as you know, is still forthcoming. That began 4 years ago with your predecessor, in my first meeting with your predecessor, John Gibbons. And so that and the lease review were happening in conjunction with us also seeking the funding to that. So just in terms of the clarification, we haven't been sitting on our hands doing nothing with the money. The contrary is actually the truth. The other thing is we also applied to council for some business funding out of that allocation. We weren't successful in getting that, even though that's a necessary part, but we're pleased to hear that council is actually undertaking some of those studies, and we'd really like to be a part of that, Chris, as well, because I think that will actually help our applications as well. And then just finally, a consideration for council is if we as a volunteer organisation acting on behalf of the community, obviously working with council, and council are also operating for the Lupton project, how do we actually mitigate against competing against one another? And how do we actually go with council hand in hand for support rather than a volunteer organisation having to compete with its own council to actually put infrastructure in place?
So, in answer to your question, we certainly have a new employee that's actually, the task is to actually make sure that we have that broad understanding and a coordinated approach. We are certainly within the next year's budget. There is actually an additional staff member to assist community groups and sporting, more particularly sporting organisations in grant and other aspects. So the reality of it is, over the number of years that I've been involved in this aspect, we're certainly moving towards an improved way in which we understand and then have a coordinated approach in investment.
So Chris, specifically, like there's an allocation of the PCIP funding for Lupton Road. I guess my question to you would be, that conversation never happened with the TMSA, and we were clearly making that plan. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that we would welcome council's partnership on, and obviously you have access and eyes over those kinds of things. And as an organisation, you know, we've been asking for that for quite some time. So hence the surprise when we see Lupton, and hence when we see the PCIP allocation.
Yeah, so certainly heard that loud and clear tonight, and certainly happy to continue the conversations we've had in the past and move forward with conversations around those aspects moving forward.
Finally, that PCIP, I noticed that the date was August this year. Am I right in saying that? There's an allocation for August of this year?
No, I don't. I'd have to double check that, to be honest, because I know that we're hearing that that's the funding stream that's coming out. We haven't got any details on that at this point in time.
Okay, thanks.
Look, I think, just mindful of the time, I think it's very Grateful for all the discussions and the queries that are put forward tonight. I will reiterate those that haven't had the opportunity to put their feedback through. Please see the team at the back. But so the next stage of the process will be that part of that submission is an invite also to personally present that feedback to council at the ordinary meeting of the 9th of May. Otherwise, they will be read in absence and then incorporated as part of that feedback. Additionally, then those matters will then be taken to the budget workshops for further consultation and consideration by council. But appreciative of everyone turning out tonight and certainly putting all those queries forward. I will now. Sorry, Councillor Hay was going to.
Thank you. It's just been brought to my attention that whilst people are being invited to come and present in person, there are only 12 seats in the gallery. So how are we going to get around that issue?
Depending on the numbers, we may have to look at a roster system. Otherwise we'll go to the centre. Yeah, depending on. Yeah. So I will, in closing, call upon the Mayor just to have some final thoughts and some wrap-ups. Thank you again. Thank you.
Firstly, thank you, David and Oliver and Chris, for working through collating all that. I know the councillors have been busy noting that conversation, as I have. And for those who've listened to some of the prior live streams, there's a couple of comments that come clear. Many of the issues raised tonight are issues that we've discussed, belted around and tried to solve, not just in the current chamber, but we've had discussions about many of them in the prior term as well, because there are the challenge we have as a region, as you've identified tonight, there's no shortage of demands. There's no shortage of needs, and everybody, as I've heard tonight and we've heard tonight, has a priority for their needs. Some of the things that you've heard tonight, and I'll use the example, those who were in the prior term of council know that the opportune purchase of a piece of land was about the principle of providing access to a similar concept footprint to what exists at TMSA for the Beaudesert community, which wasn't quite articulated tonight, but that's the rationale for why that sits there. It was an opportunity to access a piece of land in a strategic position at a moment in history that we decided to purchase. And at some point we need to have a plan that actually basically catches that gap up for Beaudesert that exists, that is already in place. So every part of this region has a different set of needs at a different time in the evolution. That is the challenge of the chamber. Thank you for articulating such a wide range of things tonight. Many of them are issues that we've tossed around before. There was a batch of issues that I was pleased to get a better understanding of, not having heard it before, about those issues on Shelf Road, which aren't specifically budget, but certainly need some urgent attention, both for the protection from an environment point of view, but also from a wellbeing point of view. And I'd urge you, and I know Judith will always have been raising that through the process, but if you have those moments, please don't wait for these opportunities or put them in the letter in the editor. Please make the service call urgently so they get into the process so we can get attention, and that gets followed up and we can monitor that. But we have covered a lot of ground tonight, and we've covered all those aspects that we feel the challenge all the time. What's the right level of revenue collection? How do we diversify it? Is one of the challenges that we grapple with strategically. We need a changed commercial sector in the region, and we have only a couple of strategic opportunities for that, which are mostly around Beaudesert, to bring some form of commercial industrial into Enterprise Drive Business Park or into the Bromwellton precinct to change the balance of the mix in our ratepayer contributions. Otherwise, it continues to be, quite frankly, an impossible challenge to catch up with the backlog of needs that this region has. And the things we believe the community deserves. The challenge we have is how do we get others to see that that's important and throw that money our way? Because there's a lot of other councils just like us saying we need help. But thank you for the engagement with the conversation. Thank you for the comprehensive list. There's a fair bit of homework to go on from that. And I'm sure some of you will want to come and present, as has been indicated, with that process. There will be some rules of engagement and timeliness around that, because if there's a lot of people, we'll have to be very tight on the time. I just flagged that for those who are preparing to come. There will be a very tight constraint. We just have to, if we have a lot of presenters. But thank you for those contributions tonight. I know it's been helpful to the thinking for myself and for the officers, and it'll certainly help us as councillors as we go through our next round of deliberations. I bid you good evening and safe travels. Some of us have a fair distance to travel, and we probably will need to hit the road fairly quickly. So apologies if we aren't able to stick around. I bid you good evening and thank you again.